Secrets of Edgewood House. In 1972, I was hired as a tour guide at a historic museum located on Edgewood Street, in the quiet suburbs of Portland, Oregon. The old house, steeped in history and architectural charm, once belonged to the prestigious Dempsey family. It was a once-in-a-lifetime opportunity for a 16-year-old high school student like me, someone who had always been passionate about history and antique structures. The house had been the residence of William Dempsey, a renowned 19th-century politician and social reformer. He lived there with his wife, Margaret, and their 5 children. The Dempsey family endured many tragedies, including the untimely deaths of 2 children due to illness, and William Dempsey's sudden demise in the house itself. Built in the Victorian style with intricate gingerbread details, the house was a testament to a bygone era. Its wide porch, which had witnessed many of Dempsey's famous speeches, added a nostalgic charm. Despite its beauty, the house carried an air of mystery, one that would leave an indelible mark on those who entered its doors. Little did I know that my summer job at Edgewood House would be more than just a history lesson. It would become an unforgettable chapter in my life. On my first day, I met my fellow tour guides. Sarah and Emily were students from Portland High, while Tom hailed from Lincoln High, a rival school. Despite our different backgrounds, we quickly bonded over our shared enthusiasm for history and the unique opportunity to work in such a fascinating place. Alice, the museum curator, was a no-nonsense woman with a keen eye for detail. She handed us detailed guides about the house's history and artifacts, stressing the importance of professionalism. But even in this structured environment, we found ways to make the job enjoyable. Sarah often marveled at the vintage gowns worn by Margaret Dempsey, stored in a small room behind the museum's main exhibit. The silk and velvet dresses were exquisite, and we couldn't resist sneaking peeks at them. Tom, though initially indifferent, soon found himself intrigued by the history surrounding the house. Together, we formed a team that balanced curiosity and humor, making the job both educational and fun. Edgewood House had 3 floors, each carefully preserved to reflect the era it represented. The 3rd floor, once the children's quarters, had been converted into a gallery space. One day, while tidying up after a tour, a wooden rocking horse suddenly rolled out from a corner of the room. First, we thought it was a prank. "Who pushed it?" Tom asked, looking at each of us. But the seriousness on everyone's face was enough to dismiss the idea. The room was silent, and the rocking horse was too heavy to have moved on its own, or so we thought. From that day forward, eerie occurrences became a regular part of our routine. One evening, while Emily and I were organizing pamphlets in the office, we heard footsteps in the hallway. They were slow and deliberate, as though someone was pacing. "Is someone here?" Emily whispered. I grabbed a flashlight and peeked into the hallway. There, at the far end, I saw a shadowy figure vanish into thin air. My heart raced as I returned to Emily. "There's no one there," I said, though I wasn't sure if I believed my own words. One quiet evening, while we were locking up, Tom froze mid-step. "Did you hear that?" he asked. We strained our ears and heard faint whispers coming from the main living room. The voices were soft but distinct, as if a conversation was taking place. Sarah called out, "Hello? Is someone there?" Silence. Moments later, we heard a faint sigh, followed by the sound of footsteps retreating. The room was empty when we checked, but the chills running down our spines confirmed that we had all heard the same thing. One night, I volunteered to stay late to complete some inventory work. The house was eerily quiet, with only the creaks of the old wooden floors breaking the silence. As I climbed the stairs to the second floor, I felt a sudden drop in temperature. Then, I heard it, a soft rustling, followed by heavy footsteps. I turned around, and there it was, a translucent figure standing at the base of the stairs. Its outline was faint, almost like smoke, but its presence was undeniable. I froze, unable to move, as it began ascending the stairs toward me. Just as it reached the midpoint, it vanished, leaving me trembling and breathless. The basement of Edgewood House was off-limits to visitors and staff, except for special maintenance purposes. However, curiosity got the better of us one afternoon. With Sarah and Tom in tow, I descended into the dimly lit basement, flashlight in hand. The air was damp and heavy, and the faint smell of mildew lingered. In one corner, we found an old wooden chest covered in dust. When we opened it, we discovered a collection of personal items, letters, a silver comb, and a wedding band. But what caught our attention was a faint tapping noise emanating from the wall. "Let's get out of here," Sarah whispered, her voice shaking. We agreed, hurriedly climbing back up the stairs. As we reached the top, the door slammed shut behind us with a force that made the house shudder. The unexplained events escalated in the weeks that followed. Tom swore he saw a chair move across the room on its own. Emily reported feeling a cold hand grip her shoulder while she was cleaning a display case. Even Sarah, the most skeptical among us, admitted to hearing someone call her name when she was alone. The turning point came when the curator, Alice, discovered that a particular artifact, a portrait of William Dempsey, had been defaced overnight. The glass covering it was shattered, and the frame was tilted at an odd angle. Security footage showed no one entering the room during the night. As summer came to an end, I decided to leave the job. The eerie experiences, while fascinating, had begun to take a toll on me. On my last day, I took one final walk through the house, saying goodbye to the rooms that had both terrified and enchanted me. Though I've since moved on, the memories of Edgewood House linger. The whispers, the shadows, and the inexplicable presence are etched in my mind. Whether it was the spirits of the Dempsey family or something darker, I'll never know. But one thing is certain. Edgewood House is a place where history and the supernatural intertwine, creating a legacy that will never be forgotten. The Shadowed House on Crestwood. In the summer of 1987, the Patterson family moved into an old house on Crestwood Lane, nestled in the outskirts of a small town in Michigan, USA. The house, built in the 1940s, had a stately appearance with gray brick walls, large windows covered by faded lace curtains, and a towering maple tree in the front yard. Frank and Evelyn Patterson hoped the house would provide a peaceful haven for their family. Joining them was Nana, Evelyn's Italian mother, known for her warmth and passion for collecting porcelain dolls, angel figurines, and crucifixes. These items filled every nook and cranny of the house, giving it an air of antiquity but also a slightly unsettling atmosphere. One day, while tidying up the backyard, Frank stumbled upon two old tombstones buried under a thick layer of grass. The engravings were almost illegible, with only a few faint letters visible. Frank assumed they were remnants of an old cemetery that once occupied the area. To avoid alarming the family, he moved the tombstones to a less conspicuous spot near a grove of trees at the edge of the property. Not long after, peculiar occurrences began to unfold. First, they were subtle, soft footsteps echoing in the quiet of the night or faint tapping sounds emanating from the walls. But soon, the events became more unnerving. As the youngest in the family, Sarah, felt an eerie unease from the moment we moved in. At night, I often sensed unseen eyes watching me from the dim corners of my bedroom. On several occasions, I saw shadows glide across the ceiling, circling slowly before disappearing. When I told Nana, she reassured me it was just my imagination, but I knew something was amiss. One particular night, as Nana slept soundly beside me, I woke to an unsettling sight. Shadows shifted and morphed above me as though observing my every move. Terrified, I pulled the blanket over my head, clinging to the hope that they would vanish by morning. A large oval mirror hung at the end of the hallway, an heirloom passed down through generations. Nana often warned us not to look into it at night, claiming mirrors were gateways between the living and the dead. After Nana passed away, an icy stillness enveloped the house. One night, while trying to fall asleep in the living room, I caught a glimpse of Nana's face reflected in the mirror. She was wearing her favorite black robe and smiling gently. I knew it wasn't a hallucination, but fear gripped me, and I avoided that hallway from then on. Another night, I awoke to the sight of a shadowy figure standing at the foot of my bed. It was a woman, her form faint and shrouded in darkness. She appeared to be wearing a headscarf, and her movements were bizarre. She began a peculiar dance, stomping her feet, waving her arms, and spinning in circles. I was paralyzed with fear, unable to look away despite the terror coursing through me. The dance seemed to last forever. Finally, the figure faded into the shadows, leaving me trembling under the covers. One evening, as the family gathered in the living room, faint whispers emanated from Nana's old bedroom. The murmurs grew louder, resembling a conversation between unseen entities. Frank, armed with courage, opened the door to investigate. The room was empty, yet an unearthly chill lingered in the air. Nana's collection of porcelain dolls had always been a centerpiece of the house, but after her passing, the dolls seemed to take on a life of their own. I vividly recall one instance when a doll I had placed on a shelf was later found lying on the living room floor, its lifelike eyes fixed directly on me. The thought that the dolls might be watching us was enough to make me dread being alone in the house. Determined to uncover the source of the disturbances, Frank decided to revisit the spot where he had discarded the tombstones. Digging deeper, he unearthed a small wooden box buried beneath the earth. Inside were old photographs, tarnished jewelry, and a leather-bound journal. The journal revealed a chilling story. The house had once belonged to a family in the 1920s who perished in a devastating fire. Their spirits seemed to remain tethered to the property. As the strange occurrences grew more frequent and menacing, the Patterson family decided it was time to leave. They relocated to a new home far from Crestwood Lane, hoping to escape the lingering shadows of their past. Yet, the memories of the house remained etched in my mind. Even now, I often dream of the shadows, the oval mirror reflecting Nana's face, or the eerie dance of the spectral woman. Although we moved on, those chilling experiences became an indelible part of my story. The shadowed house on Crestwood serves as a haunting reminder that some mysteries are best left unexplored, and not all doors should be opened. The haunting of Serenity Lake. The Bennett family had a tradition. Every summer for the past 5 years, they would retreat to Serenity Lake, a picturesque but remote resort nestled deep in the woods of Maine. For Mr. and Mrs. Bennett, it was a sanctuary from the chaos of city life. For their sons, Paul, aged 14, and Lucas, aged 12, it was a place of exploration and adventure. This summer, they arrived later than usual, their assigned cabin tucked further into the woods than before. Unlike previous years, this one was more secluded, with towering pines encircling the area and the shimmering lake barely visible through the dense foliage. The cabin, rustic yet welcoming, seemed almost alive, with creaks and groans echoing softly as they settled in. Paul, always the curious one, immediately noticed the large window in his and Lucas's shared room. It offered a view of the forest, the dark canopy making it hard to see far into the trees. He felt an inexplicable unease, but brushed it off as the product of too many late-night horror movies. The first night was uneventful. Exhausted from the drive, the family went to bed early. Paul woke once during the night to the sound of an owl hooting nearby, but otherwise, everything seemed normal. The second night, however, was different. At precisely 3:13 a.m., Paul was jolted awake by a soft knocking. Groggy and disoriented, he sat up, listening intently. The sound grew louder, rhythmic and deliberate, as if someone or something was rapping on the window. Heart pounding, Paul turned his head toward the source of the noise. Through the faint moonlight filtering into the room, he saw her, a girl, drenched as if she had just emerged from the lake, stood by the window. Her long black hair clung to her face, obscuring her features. She wore a tattered white dress that hung limply from her frame. For a moment, Paul couldn't move. He stared at her, frozen in place. Then, as if sensing his gaze, she tilted her head slightly. A low, guttural sound escaped her lips, barely audible but enough to send shivers down Paul's spine. He dove under the covers, trembling. The knocking continued for what felt like an eternity before it stopped abruptly. When he finally summoned the courage to peek out, she was gone. The next morning, Paul told Lucas what he had seen. "You were dreaming," Lucas said, dismissing his brother's fear. "It's probably just a branch tapping against the window." But Paul wasn't convinced. Determined to find answers, he decided to explore the resort. At the main lodge, he approached the manager, Mr. Harrington, an elderly man with a weathered face and piercing blue eyes. "Has anyone ever mentioned strange things happening around here?" Paul asked hesitantly. Mr. Harrington hesitated before speaking. "Serenity Lake has its share of stories," he admitted. "There's an old tale about a girl named Eleanor who drowned here decades ago. They say her spirit lingers, searching for someone to join her in the lake." Paul felt a chill run down his spine. "Do you believe it?" he asked. The manager's gaze grew distant. "I've worked here for 30 years, he said slowly, "and there are things I've seen that I can't explain." That evening, Paul shared what he had learned with Lucas. Despite his earlier skepticism, Lucas couldn't help but feel uneasy. Together, they decided to research Eleanor's story. They learned that Eleanor was the daughter of a wealthy family who had owned a summer estate near the lake in the 1940s. She was said to have been a lonely child, often seen wandering the woods or sitting by the water's edge. One stormy night, she disappeared. Her parents searched frantically, but all they found were her shoes and a piece of her dress floating near the shore. Her body was never recovered. Rumors spread that Eleanor had been lured into the lake by a malevolent force. Others claimed she had drowned herself out of despair. Regardless of the truth, sightings of a ghostly figure matching her description had been reported ever since. The next night, Paul and Lucas stayed awake, determined to see if the knocking would return. They left the window curtains slightly open, allowing the moonlight to spill into the room. At 3:13 a.m., it began. The knocking was faint at first, then grew louder. Paul and Lucas exchanged nervous glances. As the sound intensified, Paul whispered, "Don't look." But Lucas, driven by curiosity, couldn't resist. He turned toward the window and gasped. "She's there," he whispered, his voice trembling. Paul forced himself to look. The girl was closer this time, her face partially visible through the hair. Her eyes were empty, void of life, and her pale lips moved silently, forming words they couldn't hear. Suddenly, the window latch rattled. The boys scrambled to their parents' room, waking them in a frenzy. Mr. Bennett grabbed a flashlight and inspected the area outside the cabin but found nothing. The following day, the family decided to take a break from the cabin and spent the afternoon at the lake. Despite the sunny weather, Paul felt a sense of unease as they paddled across the water. He couldn't shake the feeling that they were being watched. That night, the knocking returned, accompanied by a soft, mournful wail. This time, the entire family heard it. Mrs. Bennett clutched her husband's arm, her face pale. "What is that?" she whispered. The sound seemed to move around the cabin, growing louder with each pass. Then, as suddenly as it had started, it stopped. The silence that followed was deafening. On their last night at the cabin, the family decided to stay together in the living room. They locked all the doors and windows, leaving no chance for anyone or anything to get inside. At 3:13 a.m., the knocking returned, this time on the front door. Paul felt a surge of dread as the sound became more insistent. Then, the door creaked open, despite being securely locked. Standing in the doorway was Eleanor. Her form was more defined now, her eyes glowing faintly in the darkness. She stepped inside, water pooling on the floor beneath her. Her gaze locked onto Paul, and she raised a hand, beckoning him. Paul felt an invisible force pulling him toward her. His family shouted his name, but their voices seemed distant. Just as he reached the threshold, Lucas grabbed his arm, breaking the spell. The girl let out an ear-piercing scream and vanished, leaving behind a trail of wet footprints. The next morning, the Bennetts packed their belongings and left the resort without looking back. As they drove away, Paul glanced out the window. In the rearview mirror, he saw Eleanor standing by the lake, her empty eyes watching them leave. Though they never returned to Serenity Lake, the memory of Eleanor stayed with Paul. Even years later, he would wake in the middle of the night, his heart pounding, as if the knocking had followed him home. Paul often wondered what would have happened if he had stepped through the doorway that night. Was Eleanor a lost soul, seeking companionship, or was she something darker, more sinister? He would never know. But one thing was certain. The ghost of Serenity Lake had left an indelible mark on his soul.
The Red Eyes in the Forest. In 2005, the Johnson family moved to a secluded farmhouse on the outskirts of Pineville, Oregon. The property was expansive, bordered by vast cornfields and an ancient forest that seemed to hum with its own mysterious life. For the parents, David and Susan, it was a dream come true, a chance to escape the chaos of city life. For 15-year-old Emma, however, it was both thrilling and unnerving. Emma was a curious and imaginative teenager. From the moment they arrived, the dense forest behind the house captivated her. Despite her father's warnings, "Stay out of the woods. They're easy to get lost in," she couldn't resist its allure. Something about the way the trees whispered in the wind and the shadows danced under the moonlight called to her. One chilly autumn night, Emma was startled awake by a soft scratching sound on her bedroom window. Her room, located on the second floor, overlooked the backyard and the edge of the forest. Initially dismissing it as a branch swaying in the wind, she turned over and closed her eyes. But the scratching grew louder, more deliberate. Slowly, she sat up and peered out the window. In the darkness, two glowing red eyes stared back at her from the tree lane. Unblinking and menacing, they seemed impossibly high off the ground, far taller than any person she could imagine. Her heart raced as she froze in place, unable to look away. After what felt like an eternity, the eyes disappeared, swallowed by the shadows. Trembling, she bolted downstairs and woke her parents. David, armed with a flashlight, searched the yard but found nothing. "Probably just a raccoon," he said dismissively, though his voice betrayed a hint of unease. The following nights were plagued with unease. Emma began hearing faint tapping on the windows, soft at first but growing more insistent. One night, the tapping turned into loud knocks. This time, when she mustered the courage to look, she saw a shadowy figure standing at the edge of the backyard. It was tall and broad-shouldered, with an aura of menace that made her blood run cold. The figure didn't move, but the glowing red eyes returned, fixed on her with an intensity that felt almost suffocating. Emma yanked the curtains shut and huddled under her blankets, her mind racing. Unable to shake her fear, Emma confided in her best friend, Liam, who lived a few miles away. A thrill seeker by nature, Liam convinced her to explore the forest and confront whatever was haunting her. Armed with flashlights and a sense of trepidation, the two ventured into the woods one cloudy afternoon. The deeper they went, the quieter it became. Even the usual rustling of leaves and chirping of birds seemed to vanish, leaving behind an eerie silence. As they neared the heart of the forest, they stumbled upon a clearing dominated by a massive oak tree. Its twisted branches reached skyward like skeletal fingers, and strange symbols were etched into its bark. Beneath the tree, they found a circle of stones surrounding a small pit. Inside the pit was a pile of charred bones, some of which bore markings that looked almost ceremonial. Suddenly, a low growl emanated from the shadows, and the air grew icy. Emma and Liam spun around to see the red eyes again, this time closer than ever. A dark silhouette emerged from the trees, its massive form shrouded in shadow. The two teens fled, crashing through the underbrush, the creature's heavy footsteps echoing behind them. When they finally reached the safety of the house, Emma turned to look back. The forest was still, but she knew the presence was still there, watching. After their harrowing encounter, the phenomena intensified. Doors slammed shut on their own, objects moved inexplicably, and disembodied whispers echoed through the house at night. One evening, Susan found muddy footprints leading from the back door to the living room. The strange part? The footprints stopped abruptly in the middle of the room. Emma's parents, once skeptical, began to believe her. David installed motion sensor lights and security cameras, but the cameras often malfunctioned, capturing only static during the most unsettling events. One night, the family dog, Max, refused to enter the kitchen, growling and baring his teeth at an empty corner. Desperate for answers, the Johnsons reached out to Dr. Eliza Moore, a local historian and paranormal expert. Dr. Moore arrived with her team and began an investigation. Using thermal cameras and electromagnetic field detectors, they scoured the property. In the forest clearing, they discovered faint traces of what appeared to be an old ritual site, likely dating back centuries. Dr. Moore theorized that the land might have been used for dark ceremonies, leaving behind a residual energy or even a malevolent entity. She conducted a cleansing ritual, burning sage and chanting protective prayers. For a brief moment, the oppressive atmosphere lifted, and the house felt lighter. Despite the cleansing, Emma couldn't shake the feeling that the entity wasn't gone. One stormy night, she woke to the sound of heavy footsteps outside her bedroom. The door creaked open, and a cold gust of air swept in. Standing in the doorway was the shadowy figure, its red eyes glowing like embers. Emma's scream brought her parents rushing in. The figure vanished, but its presence lingered, determined to end the nightmare. Dr. Moore returned for a final ritual. This time, she used ancient incantations and sealed the clearing in the forest with protective sigils. As the ritual concluded, A deafening roar echoed through the woods, and the red eyes appeared one last time before fading into darkness. The Johnsons sold the house shortly after and moved to a bustling suburb, leaving the haunting memories behind. The new owners reported no strange occurrences, but Emma knew the forest still held its secrets. Years later, Emma, now an adult, would occasionally drive past the old house. She never stopped, but she always felt a shiver when she glanced toward the forest. The red eyes might have disappeared, but their memory remained, a chilling reminder of the unknown lurking just beyond the trees.
Thank you for spending your time with us tonight, exploring these mysterious and spine-chilling stories. If these tales have sparked your curiosity or left you with unforgettable feelings, don't hesitate to share your thoughts in the comments below. And if you've had similar paranormal experiences that you'd like to share, feel free to send your story to the email address provided in the description. Who knows? Your story might become part of our journey into the spiritual world in a future episode. Don't forget to hit like, subscribe, and turn on the notification bell so you won't miss any of our haunting tales. See you in the next episode, and remember, always keep a light by your side.